And we are live. Hi, everybody. It's Vivek Patel here from Meaningful Ideas.
Hello, and I am Sarah, author of Peaceful Discipline and founder of Dandelion Seeds Positive Parenting.
Wonderful. And we are here today to talk about how to guide your kids without punishments and spanking, guidance without control.
Sounds like an important topic because let's face it, it's hard when you're a parent to have all of these conflicting messages in society where perhaps our family of origin or other parents we know say, oh, just teach them when they're young, be really firm with them, use these methods, and then you won't have problems when they're older. And unfortunately, that's actually not true. That's based on some really old beliefs about best practices of parenting and caregiving. And the truth is, and Vivek and I have done the research, and we work with a lot of people who do the research, when you actually have a connection-based relationship with your child that is not based on punishment, the child actually wants to do better alongside you because they think of you as their safe place to whom they can turn when they are struggling or having problems, and you actually work together as a team, as opposed to having the child be afraid of you and therefore have them not only more likely to act out, but also to have them hide it from you because they're afraid of you. And none of us wants our children to be afraid of us, right?
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the time we forget that what we call good behavior comes from our feelings, comes from our values, comes from the principles that we live, comes from the relationships that we have and how we value those relationships. It doesn't really come from being afraid of consequences, and we think that it does because it's what we've been programmed to believe through, like you said, through our family, but also through culture. My family's from India. And it's a big punishment and spanking culture in India. I mean, I think conscious parenting is starting to weasel its way in there, but it's a big part of the culture. And then we have almost all of society's systems reflect that: the education system, the financial system, the legal system. I do workshops in prisons with my mother, and have been doing so for a decade. And in that environment also, you can see the ineffectiveness of punishments, and how connection and empathy and communication and looking at deep values and the kind of people that we really want to be and the kind of lives we really want to lead, when we start to do that kind of deep thinking in a safe environment, that's what really makes change. And it's no different with our kids. It's no different with our kids because they have this light inside of them, this beauty and goodness inside of them, aching to come out. And if we nourish them to be who they are, rather than try and control and make them who we want them to be, that beauty comes out quite naturally.
Yes, I love that. And I love the work that you do with your mom. And, a lot of us grow up having been spanked or having been punished in pretty harsh ways. And we think, well, I turned out fine and I still love my parents, therefore it must be okay. Well, the reality is a lot of us are starting to say, and I'll speak just for myself here, it actually didn't make me turn out fine. I may have found my way to fine-ish, but it took a lot of work to get there. And because of the spanking that I specifically remember receiving from my dad, and I'm not saying this to throw my dad under the bus, it's just that he was the one who did that when I was little. And at the time, I even remember thinking, being, a 3-year-old, and I'm going to ask forgiveness ahead of time for what I'm about to say, but even at the time, I remember being 3 years old or so, and I have a specific memory where I remember him being about to do that to me and having me think, not, oh, maybe I should change my behavior next time. Maybe I should be a better kid. Maybe I should whatever. Instead, I was thinking whatever the 3-year-old equivalent was to, wow, what a jerk. I can't believe he's treating me this way. He's supposed to love me. Am I not lovable? It drove this wedge between us. And, family of origin stuff, topic for a different day, but I can tell you that there are a lot of us who are now able to look back and say, that actually wasn't what I needed. What I needed was somebody to guide me and to say, hey, for me, it was because I wouldn't eat this fish sandwich that he brought home. Like that was the reason for it in that instance. Turned out later I would have been allergic to it. It's a really good thing I did that. It's fascinating how my intuition, even at 3, was like, no, don't do that. But I digress, but even still, in the moment, I was able to say, you spanking me is not going to teach me to like fish sandwiches. Like, but it's such a common narrative that I
Yeah,
really normalized for people. We can
yeah.
still love our parents. We can still have a close relationship. We don't need to throw them under the proverbial bus. And we can be brave enough to say, that thing really didn't serve me, didn't make me a better person, didn't make me like fish sandwiches. I didn't come out stronger because of it. I actually had healing to do because of it.
Absolutely. And I love that you told that story because I have like an almost identical story, which doesn't surprise me at all. Also, around 3 years old, I remember I have a clear memory of being on the landing, going down to the basement. And I don't remember the reason for it, the fish sandwich reason for it, but I remember being over my dad's knee and him hitting me. And I had this sort of like out of body experience where I was looking down on the scene and I could feel the inhumanity of it. I could feel the injustice of it. I could feel like I remember thinking, again, in the 3-year-old way, but I remember thinking, this is not how humans are supposed to treat each other. And I made a promise at that point that I would grow up and be a dad and never treat my kid that way. Like that's how early I was committed to this. And yet through my life, because of the and I'm going to call it bullying that I received at home. And then I ended up getting bullied at school as well, and I didn't have a safe place at home to go and process it. But as soon as I got a little bit of power in my teens, I acted out like wild. I ended up running around with a really dangerous group of people, and I was committing crimes, and I was lighting things on fire, and I was stealing and robbing, and I was doing all of this stuff. Like really, for years, my life went that way, and all the punishments and consequences never had any effect until I was in my early to mid 20s and had a sort of an epiphany of conscience about recognizing that I wanted more for myself, and that if I wanted to have a kid, I couldn't be this person and give them what I wanted to give them. And so I made some changes, but it really stands out to me that the coercive, unsafe upbringing has a lot of detrimental effects in how we are raised. And I know in your book, Sarah, you have outlined some of the research that shows what those effects are. And I wonder if you could spend some time sharing some of that from your
I'm
studies.
happy to do that. And first of all, my 3-year-old self just wants to give your 3-year-old self a hug and say,
Same.
it's going to turn out all right. It's just going to take
Yeah.
some work to get there, but you did all
Yeah.
better. So my little 3-year-old self is sending you all sorts of love.
Thank
So
you. And let's send that out to like everyone listening to,
yeah,
because we
yeah.
could
All
all
of you
really
who
use
are
that.
getting love right now, all of your little selves who didn't deserve it, and you deserve somebody who would just scoop you up in their arms and say, we're going to work through this together. And that's
Yeah.
honestly deserved.
Oh,
So
it's so
in
beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, in my book, I've got a small section in here. The book is Peaceful Discipline. I've got a heck of a glare coming in through my window, but that's the book for people who are curious, Peaceful Discipline. Um, I have one chapter in here, and obviously this book is a lot of pages, but I have one chapter in here that specifically talks to a lot of the really common quote unquote consequences that parents inflict upon their children, all of which are punitive. And I go through the science behind why many of these things actually backfire. And then good news, the rest of the book talks about what to do instead. So I don't just leave you hanging with don't do that. And for you, I love what you said yesterday about the don't do's and the do-do's. I have a lot of do-do's in this book,
Right.
but very briefly, some of the risks of corporal punishment include number one, potential for increased aggressive behavior, and that can endure into adolescence and adulthood. And you just shared your own personal example of how that manifested for you right there. Negative developmental outcomes, including lower IQ, which I find fascinating, continuation of family violence being passed down from generation to generation, creating a deep trauma history and increased risk for psychiatric disorders, greater likelihood, and I'm going to do a trigger warning here for anybody who needs to mute this for just a second, greater likelihood of future substance abuse, not only alcohol, but also street drugs, as well as greater risk for suicide. And finally, the last one I have, and I do go into a little bit of detail about some of these as well, but increased risk factor for anxiety disorders and antisocial behavior. So you may have a parent who says, well, and again, I'll just keep this in my personal example because it's the one I started with. Maybe my dad would have gotten me to eat the fish sandwich that day, but at what cost? Would it have
Mm,
increased my likelihood of engaging in crimes, antisocial behavior, drugs, alcohol, potential for suicidality, all of these things? Is it really worth it over a fish sandwich? I'm going to say no.
mm,
So anyway, a lot more detail in here, but I thought it might be helpful if we started with, here's some of the why, because
yeah,
it's just about the act of spanking. That is certainly part of the problem, but let's look big picture. We have a global mental health crisis,
mm,
but for kids too. And if we can be doing anything within our power to say, how can I show up for my children and help them feel loved and wanted and emotionally secure with me? How can I step away from these punitive methods and create a connection and joy-based home? I want that for my family.
yeah, for sure. And a lot of the time people will say, yeah, but not everyone in the world is gonna treat them that way. And I agree with that. I mean, I've seen my kid in her life, right from kindergarten all the way up, have to experience a lot of people, kids and adults alike, that don't treat them that way. And for me, the best defense against that stuff isn't also receiving it at home. It's having a strong sense of yourself, having a strong sense of self-love, of self-knowledge, self-awareness, a sense of your own values. And once you're really deeply rooted in that stuff, you're able to process when other people are not being kind to you and and not be reactive to it, but actually make well-considered decisions. Just the other day, my kid's going to be 26 very soon. So I've been doing this for a long time. Let me say I've made lots of mistakes. That's how I've learned everything. And she was talking about these managers at work that are giving a lot of trouble to a lot of the employees. And so the employees are kind of like taking it out on the managers, and there's this whole stuff happening. And she said, Dad, I don't like these managers any better than anyone else. I really don't. But I'm not going to bully them because there's no point in my being unkind to them. Because if they're doing this stuff, they're obviously doing it because they're also struggling in their lives. And even though I don't like them, and even though they're causing hassle to me, I'm not going to cause a hassle back to them. And now she's getting all these extra shifts, and she just recently got promoted, and like all this stuff. Like people say, oh, it's not preparing them for a job, but in a lot of ways, it really does prepare them for a job to learn these deeper skills of how to connect with people, how to connect with themselves. When she does a good job, when she works hard at work, she's not doing it because she's afraid of consequences. She's doing it because she cares about the people she works with. She cares about the environment, and she wants to create a good team effort. And like that's how we did things at home too, right? And so I think for me, I always think that one of the most important roles of the parent is to be a guide. We always hear people say, "Oh, I'm not supposed to be my kid's friend. I'm their parent." And there's some kind of truth to that in the sense that only being a friend and not also a guide is, and a friend. When we think of friend, we think of peer. Like another 3-year-old or another 16-year-old. But a friend is also a really deep human relationship. But along with that, we are also our children's guides. I talk about 3 relationships that we have as parents, and that is the role of guide, the role of model, and the role of friend. And so the guide relationship is the one we're going to talk about today. How can we make our guidance something that's really effective so our kids want our guidance? Our kids crave, not just want it, but crave it. Like my kid, recently she told us that whenever she is trying to solve a problem, she just stops and she thinks, what would mom do? That's the question she asks herself. And this is a 26-year-old. Like most 26-year-olds don't want to hear from their parents, and certainly don't use their wisdom as their guiding force, right? But but the guidance from us has always felt really good to her, and it's always been empowering. And she's seen how much effort we put into learning from our mistakes. And so I think what would be useful for us to share with people is some things that makes kids not trust our guidance, and then how can we foster a positive, really empowering guiding relationship with our kids. So why don't we jump into that? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I love, by the way, the example you shared with your daughter, because you're right. She has that self-assurance of, I know I am worthy of love
Mm,
despite what's happening here. And I am not looking for that external validation of other people, consequences, behavior, whatever, because I know that I'm here for my own reasons. And that is one of the beautiful byproducts of the way you raised her, because she knows she is inherently worthy of love
mm,
and connection and good things. And she does things because she wants to do them, not because she is made, feeling made or forced to do these things. So I think that's a
yeah,
really cool story. And I think
for
there is a
sure.
book that I want to talk about very quickly to that too, in addition to what you just suggested, which is we do know that human nature is to seek out that which is emotionally familiar to us, because
Mm,
familiar in the brain equates to safe. Even if it's
mm,
not actually safe, our body still says, I know this. So I can tell you as a woman that one of the things that I really had to work to overcome was not equating a certain type of behavior, i.e. the one I was mentioned, I mentioned I was raised with before, with being a healthy, safe relationship.
aha,
Time, and again, I'm being really vulnerable in front of tons of you, but I'm hoping this will be relatable too. For a long time, I sought out romantic relationships that weren't very emotionally safe,
mm,
because that was the roadmap that I had growing up. And in order to overcome that, I had to do a whole lot of soul searching, a whole lot of therapy, a whole lot of inner work to say, actually, no, healthy is safe. Familiar
mm,
isn't always safe. So, what is healthy? What does that look like? And then I was able to get to the point that your daughter is, where I was able to say, I like myself. I'm going to stand up for myself. If something isn't emotionally safe to me, I have the option to leave, and then learned how to do that. So it is actually empowering for our children to be able to teach them from an early age, or honestly, any age, it's never too late to change, to be
mm,
able to say, this is what emotional safety actually feels like. So that someday when they go to choose friendships or romantic relationships or whatever it may be, they say, I want something that feels like what I knew at home.
yeah,
Not somebody who I had to be afraid of sometimes, not somebody who was unpredictable, not somebody who sometimes was my safe place, but other times they were my scary place. And really
mm,
be able to say, not what perfection feels like, but what a pretty darn good relationship feels like most of the time. That's really, I think, what we're aiming for. So to your
mm,
point about where do we start with that? I think a lot of it is realizing that we all have triggers, and
mm,
that is normal. It's part of the human experience, and we are not broken for having triggers. It just means we're human.
mm,
For example, on days when I am better rested, when I have put healthy food in my body, when I am, having positive thoughts and positive experiences with those around me, these are the days where I have the capacity to go to my child and say, I am coming to you from a place of abundance. And
mm,
therefore, I am going to get curious about your behavior. If I have questions about it, I'm going to remember to be playful rather than argumentative or whatever other option I might want to throw out there. Knowing this is all happening within me is such an important starting point, because let's pretend I slept horribly last night and I forgot to have breakfast and this, that, and the other thing. Guess what? My go-to is not going to be curiosity, play, empowerment. It's going to be this place of, the world's out to get me and my child is too. So I'm going to be defensive and less likely to engage in the type of parenting behaviors that I actually really want to be. So I don't want to call it self-care, because that feels like, let's just turn off this show right now. That's so cliche.
right,
But really, when we can say, what's going on in my body right now, so I can simply be aware. And it doesn't mean every night I'm going to get a perfect night's sleep. What
yeah,
it means is that on the days when I'm tired, I can start that day by saying something like, I'm tired today. Therefore, I can have the self-awareness to say, I might struggle more as a parent. So, what are
mm,
some things I can do to make today as easy on both of us as I possibly can? and set myself up to succeed with full disclosure already happening in my own mind, rather than catching myself or my child off guard, all because I started the day feeling tired. How does
Yeah.
that land with you for a starting point?
Yeah, that self-awareness is so important, starting with self-awareness. It's great modeling too, for goodness sakes, isn't it? To be aware of our, the fallibility of our humanity, that we're always going to, I call myself a mistake-making machine, just so I can remind myself that, we're learning, my kid and I are learning together. We're learning about our emotions together. We're learning about our choices together. We're learning about communication together. And you're right, like life as an adult is really freaking hard. We have so many things. We have our the trauma of our upbringing that we shared, and the patterns that creates, and the fear responses that creates. We also have, like, having to deal with capitalism in a world that's been, created through thousands of years of coercive, largely unconscious history. And we have to deal with things like money and work and health things and relationships. And we end up overwhelmed, what I call overwhelmed and under-resourced, on a regular basis. So it's really, 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 really hard. And I think it's important for us to, on top of that, then if we have layers of marginalization in our lives, gender and race and disability and sexual orientation and classism, and we have all these different things that make life even harder for us. It's important for us to give ourselves real understanding and grace for those things, to really be able to recognize how hard it makes it for us to change patterns, what a heavy weight it is that we carry. It doesn't mean we're excusing not doing the work, but we're acknowledging how much freaking work it actually is. And it's I say it's like changing patterns feels like a cheese grater rubbing across our brain. And I always say chase the cheese grater, and because it can be really hard. So I really want, I'm glad we're starting with this, because I really want to give a lot of compassion to the hard work. I mean, parenting is hard work anyways. Conscious parenting, non-coercive, collaborative parenting is 10 times the hard work, because we're always evaluating and thinking and deepening our understanding from one day to the next to the next. And when we fall back, when we act out of alignment, it's like you said, it's not the end of the world. We can go back and do a repair process with our kids. And I think that's an important thing, is learning how to do effective repair processes with our kids.
Exactly.
Because
Yeah, exactly. And repair process with ourselves too, because I don't know about you, but I hear the expression mom guilt all the time. And obviously that can apply to dads too. But it's really coming from exactly that place that you just described, that
yeah,
chronically, not just temporarily overwhelmed and under-resourced. It's that chronic, it's been years and years and years. And then there was a pandemic, and then there was this, that, and the other thing on top of all of the stress. So many of us have learned to be hyper vigilant in keeping our nervous systems so aware all the time of things that might go wrong, that it's just
yeah,
adding to our chronic stress. And when we do inevitably mess up with our child, the repair process is everything, as you just alluded to. We owe them an apology, and we have the opportunity to apologize and make things right with them. But we also do need to look in the mirror and say, I forgive myself too, because let's face it, it's hard enough as it is, and it doesn't do anybody any good if I'm walking around with the shame and the guilt and the narrative of I'm a bad parent.
yeah.
I've had bad, in fact, one of my favorite reframes is, rather than, and I wish I had a dad and other caregiver equivalent to this, but rather than I am a bad mom, what's at the rest of the word mom? I had a bad moment. And let's E to the end of that. It's one of
Right.
my personal favorite reframes, because when I'm able to give myself grace and say, you know what, that situation was legitimately hard,
Yeah.
I can forgive myself and I can move forward with perhaps new skills, new understanding, a new plan how to handle it next time.
Mhm.
I don't need to carry around that shame that
Yeah.
loves to tell me that I'm a bad person on top of all the other stuff. So we need to be
Yeah.
so gentle with ourselves too.
For sure. My reframe for that is I love how similar we are, Sarah. My reframe for that is don't think of yourself as a good parent or a bad parent. Think of yourself as an evolving parent.
Love it.
Yeah, and that way we can always be evolving. It's something I call the daily grind. The daily grind is it really highlights the fact that it's daily work. It's not like a magic wand. You just say, "Oh, I've heard of gentle parenting. Now everything's going to change." It's not like that. So the daily grind is at the beginning of the day, you commit to being conscious, to watching your triggers, to being curious, to guiding your kids in ways that feel safe and empowering to them. And then you start the day that way with that intention. And then you make 100 mistakes throughout the day. And everything falls apart. And you do your best. You have some good moments. You have some bad moments. And that's just life, right? And then at the end of the day, you review the day before you go to sleep. You think what worked well, what didn't, why did it work well, why didn't it, what can I learn from it, what can I plan to work on tomorrow, and you pick something, one or two things to work on tomorrow, and then wake up the next morning and you set a new intention for the next day, and you put it on repeat basically for the rest of your life. That's living a conscious life, you know. And me doing that, you know, like the first few years when my kiddo came along, I didn't even know the word. This is 1997 when she was born. I didn't even know the word trigger. I didn't know there was such a thing. You know, people now have so much more access to information than ever when my kid came along. And so I used to say my ideology is clashing with my reality, because it hit me like a ton of bricks. Like I was this yelling, screaming wild man, wondering where the hell was this coming from, you know. I even wrote a poem that said, I'm a cool young dad. At the end of the poem was, I'm a cool young dad, and I would never act that way by choice, but I get terrified when I open my mouth and out comes an adult's voice.
Oh,
Yeah,
I love that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And
Oh,
uh, and so for me, you know, a lot of but we're doing the daily grind really helped me have something solid that I could rely on, because I knew every single day I was going to love. And by the way, the love and forgiveness part of that is part of the daily grind. At the end of the day, I forgive myself. I call it feck yourself. Go feck yourself. Feck stands for forgiveness, empathy, compassion, and kindness. FECK. And so I always remind myself to feck myself every day. And and so that's part of it. And the daily grind really helps because, you know, like going back to guidance. Like I really wanted my guidance to feel safe to my kid. And so often, the way that we've been taught and modeled how to guide children doesn't feel safe to them. With, you know, like we said before, punishments and imposed consequences, and you know, enforcing rules, which is different than guidelines. You know, a rule is something you have to enforce with some kind of hierarchical power, but a guideline is something we all work on together, right? Because it's a shared value. But you know, when our guidance feels unsafe to our kids, we become unsafe to them. And in many ways, what happens is when we walk into the room, their nervous system tenses up. They start to protect themselves from us, you know. And I remember that as a kid, and I see that with kids too. When I work with kids, when I walk into the room, I'm just another until they get to know me. I'm just another adult, right? And they're on high alert with adults. And so instead of our guidance feeling unsafe, instead of it hurting, instead of, you know, a lot of the time, what we think of as guidance actually makes their lived experience feel worse. What we want instead is for our guidance to feel safe, to feel empowering, to feel that it makes their lives tangibly better. If I follow what my parents said, my relationships are better, my emotional state is better, my needs get met, my goals, somehow I can achieve them more. Like, I mean, wouldn't all of us want to follow a guide that's like that? You know, like I certainly don't want to follow a guide that's going to punish me if I make a mistake. I don't want to follow a guide where if I try out their stuff, it makes my life worse, and that somehow, you know, the other thing is that I never wanted my kid to feel that there was some consequence if they didn't follow my guidance. I wanted it to be something that they included in their own thinking and processing, right? Because what happens is when we come from the unsafe mindset, the kids end up forming negative associations with our guidance, and those associations go deep into the mind, deep into our neural pathways and our nervous system. Our guidance ends up becoming related to things like power struggles and fighting for their power and control in their life, fighting for a sense of their own autonomy. And that's one of my sayings is reliable unpleasantness. Parents have this reliable unpleasantness, and kids know it, right? Like you said, which parent is going to show up that day or at any given moment. And so when we can shift to reliable curiosity, I love how you use the word curiosity. When we can shift to our kids knowing that we're going to be curious about their life experience, that we want to really know what they're thinking and really know. I had a parent reach out to me just today. It was a beautiful way to start the day, saying, because I had helped them with some stuff with one of their kids. And they said every time their kid says no to them now, they go to them and say, I really want to understand why. They don't say you have to, you need to, you should, you got to. They say, I really want to understand why. Because I don't want to do anything that you're not feeling. Like the whole relationship with this kid has shifted and blossomed since this has happened. And so like we want to do, one thing I want to encourage parents to do is think about when you're guiding your kids, what kind of association are they making? Emotional, relational, in their nervous system, physical, environmental, what kind of association are they making with the guidance? Is it fostering a positive association that you can layer on over the years, more and more and more positive associations until it feels like this beautiful thing? Or are you, even with best of intentions, creating negative associations that also layer and layer and layer and create the disconnection that happens where kids end up turning away from us, which is what we're trying to avoid, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, I want to frame. I'm going to get a big like wall and frame everything you just said, and it'll be like the wall of Vivek wisdom here.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've a couple of thoughts came up while you were sharing
Yeah.
all of those beautiful examples. One is going all the way back to when you were talking about your nightly ritual of thinking about what worked today, what didn't, what do I want to do differently tomorrow. You are tapping right into brain science there, because I noticed as you were going through that practice, you were by yourself. You were in here. You weren't having this dialogue with your child. You were not saying, what are you going to do differently tomorrow? And by keeping this discussion in your head, not only were you creating the parts that you were going to own, but you were actually strengthening your own neural pathways by visualizing not just the generic, I'm going to be a good dad, I'm going to have a good day tomorrow, whatever. But when you come up with those specific intentions, that helps the brain know what to do and exactly what that's going to look like. So for a parent who's watching us right now, what that might look like is, I'm going to pick something really, really specific. So maybe we have a predictable trouble spot throughout the day. I'll make it up. It's, leaving the house in the morning. Every morning we have a battle before we leave the door, before we go out the door. And I want that to be a peaceful transition time for us. So I want to visualize the details of how I want to be in that moment. And the more specific I can be, just imagining the parts that I will own, the parts I will do to be peaceful and collaborative, that actually helps me create and strengthen neural pathways as if I had already done those things. One of the fascinating things about the brain is that the brain can't completely tell the difference between what we imagine and what's actually happened. So when we imagine the nitty-gritty details of how we want to be, our brain effectively says, I've already done that. I can do that again. And the more we practice it through visualization and in real life, the more likely that pattern is to become our default pattern versus what we were doing before. So I really wanted to highlight that part of what you were saying. And another thing I want to highlight that you touched on was the importance of working alongside our children. And rather than being rules-based, hey, I'm the adult, look how big and strong and beautiful I am, it's fun. Look at this rule I can make you follow.
Yeah.
And when we have a collaborative approach, here's what we know about human nature. Everybody on the planet, for better or worse, thinks that their own ideas are brilliant, right?
Right.
So when you have a child who feels like, I contributed to that idea, I was part of that, they are more likely to follow through because, again, human nature, they feel like they were part of it, they were empowered, they had agency to affect the outcome. very quick personal example. Years ago, I was
Yeah.
working in a classroom, and there was this little boy, Tommy. God love him. Tommy, if you're out there someday, you have a place in my heart. Tommy was, according to some of the teachers, such a hard student. He was
Mm.
6 years old and he had energy with a capital E. He was sweet as they come, but by very common definitions, I'm not going to say I would use this term personally, but he was known for being quote unquote disruptive. So one day, one of the teachers said to me, "Hey, Sarah, take Tommy in the hall, have a talk to him, tell him how he needs to behave, and just handle him." And I said, "Okay, sure. I welcome the opportunities." I said, "Tommy, let's go in the hall." So Tommy came out. His shoulders were slumped. He was looking down. He was expecting, exactly to your point, because I'm tall, I'm an adult, he was thinking I was going to get him in trouble. But instead, I started
Mm.
talking about his strengths. And I said, "Tommy, you have so much energy. I love it when you use your energy to help others. What do you
Uh-huh.
like about your energy?" And he started telling me all the things about his energy and how much he loves it. And I said, "Tommy, you are so good at getting other kids' attention. How do
Yeah.
you do that? What works well for you to get their attention?" And he told me all about how good he is at getting kids' attention. So we were totally playing to his strengths. And I said,
Yeah.
"Tom, I don't know if you're going to be ready for this, but I have an idea. Our class really needs somebody who's going to help the other kids know when it's time to pay attention versus when
Mm.
it's time to play and be active and noisy." By the way, I did eventually move on to a play-based school. So, this was part of my evolution as well, but this was more
Right.
focused.
Yeah.
But at the time, Tommy said, "I have an idea. Can I be in charge of keeping the class quiet when they need to be quiet? And can I tell them when it's time to be noisy?" So Tommy, if you think you can do that, that would be an amazing job for you. And he like, not only did he stop slumping, he
Yeah.
strutted. He absolutely strutted back into class. And anytime another kid made a noise, he would stand up, cross his arms, give him a look, be quiet. And when it was time to play, he led the play, better than anybody else possibly could have. But just because he felt that we were playing to his strengths, he felt empowered. He felt like, I have agency to make a change using my gifts and my passions for good.
Yeah.
It changed everything. And he walked
Absolutely.
away feeling empowered and wonderful because he felt like we cared enough about him to play to his strengths rather than punish him for his deficiencies, so to
Yeah,
speak.
for
So
sure.
we've just got to work with our kids because
Yeah.
they're brilliant and they're masters of their own outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to to turn that into a principle, what you just shared, because I think one thing that we can do with our kids on a regular basis is to point out whatever behavior that they're exhibiting, what the strength of it is, what we appreciate about it. Even if your kid yells at you and swears at you and tells you you're the worst person in the world and they hate you, you can say, "I really appreciate your emotional honesty and that you're not afraid to share what you're feeling. This is an amazing thing." That way we can actually communicate, kid. Thank you so much for sharing. This is my phrase. Thank you so much for sharing your truth with me. I say that I don't know how many thousands of times I've said that with kids. But like when you say that something like that to a kid, it really lets them feel that you really see them and you really accept them. But in every situation, there's something that we can appreciate about what the kid is doing. And when they see that that's where we come from it at first, starting with appreciation, starting with something where we're connecting, starting with something, even if you really have to point out a change that you want to work towards together, starting by doing this makes a big difference, because then the kid feels, and honestly, this is the same with adults too, because I work with a lot of adults. And if I start immediately telling them everything they're doing wrong, it's not as easy a conversation. But when I say, you know what, I can really see how much you care about your kids and how much you want to do the things that are going to really empower them. I mean, when you make this rule with your kid around that they have to finish their food, it's because you want to keep them healthy, of course. And I really appreciate that. I said, let's look at how to really keep them healthy. What are the real skills around food and eating? that are going to really keep them healthy, because you have such a passion for that, and I appreciate it. And then we can start to talk about body awareness and, and understanding nutrition and all the stuff that leads into the more collaborative approach. But starting from that place of appreciation is so important. So with your, again, I'm going to encourage parents here, when your kids are doing things that you want to have a conversation with them about, start by what you can appreciate. Just like the example you gave, I appreciate your energy. It's just wonderful, that energy that you have. Like I had this experience where I remember I was in a park hanging out with a friend of mine. They had come to visit from out of town. We just said, let's just go to the park and swing on the swings. And so we were sitting on the swings, and there were 3 swings on the swing set. And this like 11-year-old, it was the middle of the school day. This 11-year-old came into the park and got on the swing and he turned to me and said, "You want to have a swing race?" And I said, "Sure." And so the two of us had this swing race, and I won. And then he was laughing. He said, "Adults don't usually swing that good. How do you do that?" And so, but then I said, why aren't you in school, kiddo? And he said, "You know what? I got suspended because I brought a knife into school." And my friend immediately started saying, "That's terrible," and threatened a teacher. He threatened a teacher. That's terrible. You shouldn't do that. So I turned to my friend and said, "Get out of here." And this is before I even had a kid. This is like a long time ago. And I said to the kiddo, "Wow, it's really intense that you brought a knife to school. That must have taken a lot of courage. Wow, that's such a cool thing." Most people would be like, "Oh, you're condoning bad behavior." But like, there's no way I wanted to push this kid away. I wanted him to know that I was really with him. And he said, "Yeah, I was really angry and I brought that knife in." And I said, "Wow, that's really intense. Don't think I would have had the courage to do that." Anyway, we started talking about it. He talked about the knife. He talked about the stuff. And then I asked him I said, "So why did you? What was that about? What were you feeling?" Because he really opened up, and he said, "Oh, well." And then he started talking to me about how he's been abused at home, and the way his father was always beating him, and just so much abuse that this kid had suffered. And we ended up talking about that, and really getting deep into, it's just some kid in the playground, right? And really getting deep into it, and he was able to offload stuff that he had probably never had a chance to share with anyone. And then we just sat in silence for a few minutes, just appreciating that it wasn't an adult and child anymore. It was 2 human spirits understanding the human connection, the human experience. And it was this beautiful moment. I'll never forget that moment. It was one of the things that in many ways guided my parenting, because like I said, it was before I even had a kid. But I remembered how, by letting go of the idea of the behavior and what I call iceberg consciousness, the iceberg where we only see the surface, but underneath there's so much, right? That coming at things from that iceberg consciousness and really being curious, it really allowed this person to open up and experience some healing. And if that was how instead of being suspended, which doesn't make any sense to me, instead of being suspended, if this is how he was responded to from that experience, he would have changed his whole experience at school, and his whole experience. I mean, he still has to deal with what he's dealing with at home, but at least school could have been a safe place for him, where he could have found some measure of healing and understanding. And so that starting with appreciation, and really, even if it's hard, sometimes it takes a lot. Let me just say, it sometimes takes a lot of creative brainstorming to think of something positive to say and to focus on. But it's worth the effort. It's really worth the effort. And then being really curious and asking really really honest questions about what a kid is feeling, and then we can share with them our values at that point. Then you can say, "Yeah, I really understand that. When you're going through a really hard time, you feel these feelings of intense anger and pain, and of course you would want to lash out with someone. And at the same time, when that happens, you don't really feel better, do you?" He said, "No, I don't." And then we say, what can we do to really feel better about ourselves in those moments? And then you can start to really think about different ways of approaching situations. I think this is extreme, bringing a knife to an 11-year-old, bringing a knife to school, but it's the same kind of thing. What are you really feeling when you're having trouble getting out of the house in the morning? Why is it such a struggle for you? I mean, it's a struggle for me too sometimes, kid. Let's talk about it. And like the food, like you ended up being allergic to the fish, for goodness sakes. You had a really good, even though you didn't know it, you had a really good reason. It makes me feel bad. Something about it feels bad. Well, let's look at how we can think about food in a way that feels good then, shall we? And then we become partners. I say we want to have a whole being, co-learning relationship with equals. Equals doesn't mean the same. It means we see each other as as equal human beings, deserving of love and compassion and belonging and kindness. And so I think that's a really great way for us to think about approaching difficult moments with our kids.
It is, yeah. And thank you for sharing that, heart-wrenching story of that child. I know it was a long time ago, but, perhaps he's watching us from somewhere in the world right now and says, I was that kid.
Yeah,
And there was a day when this guy showed up for me. And even if he didn't condone the knife, he validated me and the pain that I was experiencing. That validation is huge. And it really speaks to not only the importance of showing up for children, even in their deepest, darkest, most difficult moments, but it also is another prime example of there's the science for you. Children who are abused are more likely to inflict harm upon others. So breaking the cycle has huge positive ramifications, not only for individuals, but for societies as well. And that's
yeah,
part of the reason we're doing this work. So I think in my closing statement here, one of the things that helps me the most as a parent, and I would encourage you to try this too, whoever you may be out there, is when you feel that trigger coming up, when you feel yourself trying to decide, what do I want to do in this moment? Because I can tell I am feeling drawn to something punitive, no matter what it might be. Scale back for just a second, literally get a change of scenery. It might mean you turn your back. It might mean you walk into another room. It might mean you go outside for a second, as long as your child is safe. But find some way where you can literally see things from a different perspective and ask yourself this one simple question: how do I want my child to see me respond right now? And when we kind of hold up that mirror and bring that self-awareness, not from a place of self-judgment or self-condemnation, but just awareness and grace for the self to say, this is hard, but I want to model for my child that I have the emotional maturity to handle hard things in ways that do no harm to others. Because that is really where I believe the cycle breaking and honestly the world changing has to start.
Yeah, for sure. And we really are, when we do this work, we really are affecting the whole world. We really are, because how we treat each other out in the world is how the world operates. It really is. I know that there's politics and I know that there's big finance, but it's all of them are humans that are running these things. And so the more humans out there that, like when my kid said, I don't want to bully the manager, even if I disagree with them. I still recognize their humanity. Like if more people were out there thinking that way, oh, what a world we would have. And I certainly wasn't like that when I was 25. I'm a little bit more like that now. But yeah, and I really appreciate this conversation we had, Sarah. I think it's worth recognizing that one of the core elements of it has been for us to be kind to ourselves as parents, because it really is so hard what we're doing. And all the pressure that we're under, all the stress that we're under, doing this work is hard. And I applaud every parent that's out there doing conscious parenting and trying to make a difference, because it's making a difference in your kid's life, and it's going to make a difference in every person they interact with, in their relationships. It's going to make a difference in the relationships that they choose and how they choose to be treated in their relationships. And we're the first model for that. We model how we treat our kids, we model how we treat ourselves, and we model how we treat other people. We can never overestimate how much influence that we have in that respect. And so, think about doing the daily grind every day. Think about fecking yourself every day: forgiveness, empathy, compassion, and kindness. Think about, I love when you said take a step back. I always say that there's always another way. When we're tempted to do the punitive approach or the power over approach, there's always another way. It might take longer. It might be harder in the short term. It's always easier in the long term, because we form a working relationship with our kids that lasts a lifetime. But it can be a lot harder because we're breaking patterns. But really convince yourself it's worth it. It's worth it both for your relationship and your kid's development. And I really believe you can do it. I believe that you have incredible wisdom inside of you. Everyone who's listening to this, you have incredible wisdom inside of you. You've gone through a lot in your life, overcome so many obstacles, dealing with so many challenges, and you've learned so much from them. And to be able to pass that on to your kid in a way that they absorb it, not resist it, is such a gift. So really think about that. How can you make your guidance feel safe, have a positive association, so that your kid carries that with you as part of their inner voice all throughout their lives? Not the criticizing, complaining voice throughout their lives, but the empowering. And this was, I just want to mention that it was the National Initiative to End Corporal Punishment organization. Their Facebook page is Hit No More, that invited us to do this talk. And I appreciate the work that they're doing, because all of us working together, there's a lot of people in the conscious parenting community that are working together to empower kids and liberate them. And I really appreciate everyone doing that work. And working together, we can make a difference. I really believe it. And I believe in each and every one of you as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that. I feel empowered just listening to you say that. So thank you for that. And I want to encourage, and let me know if you want to do this too, but for anybody here who wants to, if you want more resources, book recommendations, podcast recommendations, accounts to follow on social media besides his and mine, I'm certainly happy to provide whatever resources I possibly can to make this journey towards peaceful parenting easier and more accessible to you. You do not have to do this alone. Even if you feel isolated, you feel like you're the only one, you're not alone. And I'm happy to provide resources to anybody who needs it above and beyond our pages here. Additionally, I'm just going to throw out an offer. If anybody ever just feels like they need to vent and isn't sure where to vent to, or just say, this is hard, even if you're not looking for a response, you're welcome to send me an email. You can do it here on Facebook Messenger. You can send me an email to my work account, which is just Sarah, S-A-R-A-H, at dandelionseeds.com. There is a hyphen in between, Sarah at dandelion-seeds.com. And you can even write in there, I don't need or want a response. I just need somebody to know that this is hard and this is what I'm working on. If you just need somebody who will listen, so to speak, I am happy to just be a sounding board for you. And even though I probably won't respond with one-on-one guidance, because I don't believe email or messenger is the best way to do that, I can certainly, if you want me to, come up with resources that might support you and share them in a broader way without obviously sharing your personal information. So I just want to make myself as a person available to anybody who might want more support down the road, because this is hard, but you don't have to do it alone.
Yeah, that's so generous, Sarah. And you know what? I have a workshop that normally I charge $37 for, that I'm going to offer. I'm going to kind of like riff off of you and offer it for free for everyone who's listening to this. And I'll put the link in the comments for a free offer. It's called Recovering from a Parenting Mistake with Maximum Change and Minimum Shame. And and it's really great. It's 2 hours long, and you want to bring a pen and paper with you as you're watching it. And I'll put a link where you can access it, and it's a private YouTube link, and it's a really beautiful workshop, and you can get it for free. And also on my YouTube channel, which is Meaningful Ideas, I have over 100 videos there, and one of the more recent videos is a 2.5-hour workshop I did last year, I think, for the No Hit Challenge put on by StopSpanking.org with Amy Bryant. And it was how to process your emotions in the midst of the daily chaos of life. And it's like 2.5 hours. And I went into a lot of detail about how to process challenging emotions. A lot of people don't have access to a therapist and don't have a lot of time. And that workshop can be really helpful too. So there, like you said, you don't have to do this alone. There's a lot of resources out there. And we'll do this again at some point, Sarah. I love our conversations. My wife was hearing us the other day and said, "Whoa, the two of you sounded so alike." And so I really appreciate you, and I really recommend people get your book. I've read it, and it's full of so much helpful information and ways to work with kids that are empowering and make them feel our connection and our love for them. So thank you for doing this.
Oh, thank you so much. My pleasure. And what the heck, I'm going to throw out first 3 people to comment in the in the comments after this. I will send a free audiobook too as well. So I can send out 3 free copies of it to support somebody who might want the audiobook. So
That's
we'll
wonderful.
and give my best to your wife as well. Till I hope to meet her someday.
Excellent. Wonderful.
All right. Thanks so much.
Peace out, everybody.